So it's my pleasure to share with you this evening some of the wisdom that's found in this remarkable writing of Pope Francis, Laudato Si, on the care for our common home. I'd like to share with you some slides that might evoke some of the thinking in Laudato Si, as well as some images, just to provide a sense of where his thinking is, and a bit about Australia in the context we find ourselves. So I'll share the screen again. One of the questions that we need to ask ourselves at this time is, how can we bring Laudato Si to life in the context of our homes, in our families, in our communities, in our homes, in our parish communities, in our school and work organisations, in the local community, in the Archdiocese of Canberra-Goulburn, but also nationally and globally. We contribute in so many ways in this interconnected web of life. So asking this question can be really helpful as we take this fifth year of Laudato Si journey. Of course, one of the ways that Laudato Si is often referred to is in the context of climate change. But we know that it's about a lot more than that. It is important that it's addressed because it really is the key mother of all justice issues, as Christiana Figueres said on our webinar last night. And it's important that we take steps forward very quickly in grappling with it. But I'd like to enter into this opening of Laudato Si tonight by saying we will talk about Laudato Si in the context of climate change, but actually more importantly at a deeper level of an integral worldview. So to understand Laudato Si, and each time we touch on it and read it, we find out that there's more and more wisdom in it, of course. What does it mean for us at this point in our lives? Well, to start with, for those who perhaps haven't had the opportunity to read it, I'll say some of the founding things about it. So Laudato Si is language from the Umbrian dialect. It comes from St. Francis of Assisi in the Canticle of Creatures. Praise be to you. Praise be to you, my Lord. So it's of course from the Canticle of Creatures from 800 years ago. And St. Francis, as you would know, is one of the most popular saints in the world today. I think one of the great ways that he managed to become such a popular saint is that he committed to communicating in the vernacular of the time. He spoke the language of the people rather than a language that was academic or a language that was for highly educated people. In that way, he made it accessible for everybody. And that really is the tone through which Pope Francis invites us to read Laudato Si. So it's about reminding all of us that the earth, our common home, is more than just a backdrop or a place in which we live out the drama of our lives. He reminds us in the very first paragraph that the earth herself is like a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. So when we think about our earthly sisters, whether they're blood sisters from our biological or family of origin, or whether they're sisters that we've met along the way in our journey of life together, we know how much our sisters mean to us. How if there is a question or a problem we have and we turn to a sister, how much we can rely on them for help, but also how much we would do for our sisters should they need our help. And when we think about our beautiful mothers who nurture us, for those who have felt the embrace of our mothers, it means the world to us. And it's the same as our relationship we're called to with the earth herself, with Mother Earth. Understanding that this connection is about kinship. It's about being in deep relationship. and it transcends the boundaries of just looking after something like the stewardship model that we've had espoused to us and encouraged for us to relate to the earth through. It really hasn't helped us enough, because what Pope Francis is saying here is you can be the steward of something and you can be asked to look after it, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily love it and care for it tenderly. And that's the kind of relationship that we're called to have with each other and with creation. The question at the very heart of Laudato Si is found at paragraph 160, and it says, what kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up? This question really puts an orientation to the context of a longer term view, of being responsible and of acting in solidarity with those who are growing up today, to pass on the earth perhaps in better condition than we've received it. That's a big job right now, isn't it? Pope Francis also says that everything is related, that we human beings are united as brothers and sisters on a wonderful pilgrimage, woven together by the love God has for each of his creatures, and which also unites us in fond affection with Brother Sun, Sister Moon, Brother River, and Mother Earth. This language is so beautiful and poetic, and we can see that it's interwoven with bonds of love. But also he makes an urgent appeal. He makes an urgent appeal for a new dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet. He says we need a conversation which includes everyone, since the environmental challenge we are undergoing and its human roots concern and affect us all. So let's have a look at the six main chapters of Laudato Si, which take us on a journey that's not linear, a journey that goes deeply through a movement. Beginning with chapter 1, we're invited to see what is happening to our common home. In chapters 2, 3, and 4, we're invited to discern, to make a judgment, if you like, from our faith perspective, based on an analysis of the root causes, and then to move to chapter 5 and 6, which invites us to act through dialogue and a whole variety of actions we can take. So as you can see, reading the entire encyclical is important, because if we stop at any one of those movement points, we're not going to come back up through the journey of knowing how to live into this. So the first chapter is a very sobering one. It invites us to look at what is going on the planet today, to take a frank and clear-eyed look at the facts. And it presents the science about climate change, certainly, about biodiversity loss, about access to fresh water, about the inequalities in the human systems that we've created and the system between ourselves and other life on the planet. And it also points out the growing inequalities. Pope Francis says that we need to listen to the cry of creation, and not just to listen to it at an intellectual level, but to dare to listen to it through our hearts and even through our guts, in terms of feeling the pain, to become painfully aware, to dare to turn what is happening to the world into our own personal suffering, and thus to discover what each of us can do about it. It's not until we experience that depth of feeling, that movement in our guts to say, we can't continue to live like this. We need to change. We need to shift that energy and do something about it. So he says that if we scan the regions of our planet, we immediately see that humanity has disappointed God's expectations. So it's quite a sobering reality check, chapter 1. Importantly then, we're invited to look at chapter 2. And in this chapter, which is one of the longest chapters, as well as chapter 6, these two chapters outline the importance of our Christian faith tradition. So the Gospel of Creation is an amazing title for this chapter. It's really about lifting up the story of creation on the same platform as the way that we revere the Gospel, which is a huge change in our perspective as Christians, because often it's been painted that humans are the pinnacle of creation at the top of the story, and that creation is somehow below or beneath that or inferior. So I think it's important to see that creation as it is right now in this present moment is a story for us to learn from, to go deeper into, and to be transformed through our relationships with it. So Pope Francis offers us in this chapter a comprehensive view of the Judeo-Christian tradition. He articulates the tremendous responsibility that we have for creation, and also highlights the intimate connection among all creation, and the fact that the natural environment is a collective good, the patrimony of all humanity, and the responsibility of everyone. There are three particular theological imperatives that I'd like to point out in this chapter that I think are significant for us at this time in terms of understanding the changes that this encyclical is bringing about in terms of theology and Catholic social teaching. The first is that Pope Francis talks about the intrinsic value of all creatures. Pope Francis tells us that each creature is significant in God's eyes, and that the true purpose of any part of creation is really only known to God. So if we can take on that understanding that each aspect, each thing, each grain of sand, each leaf, each rock, each animal is an intrinsic part of God's creation, valued and loved by God, then perhaps we would treat and relate with creation more differently than we do today. We're invited to relate so much more deeply. The second key theological imperative that he points out for us is seeing creation as a revelation of God. Often this language of revelation is referred to in sacred scripture, in the books of Revelation or the book of Revelations. And in that context, we're invited to see that creation in every moment is revealing God to us. It's not to say that creation is God, but it's to say that creation is telling us or communicating a message of God to us in every moment. If only we can see that. If only we can take off the shields perhaps on our eyes that block us or blind us from seeing God in creation. If only we can hear God communicating to us through creation. If only we can open our hearts to feel creation around us at every moment, even in the human created elements of our homes, our offices, and our lives. The third theological imperative that's something worth reflecting on as well is the concept of sublime communion that Pope Francis talks about in the second chapter. It's described as a state of being in proper, creative, and right relationship with ourselves, with our human brothers and sisters, with all creation, and with our Creator God. When we're in right relationship with all of these elements around us and within us, and with the spiritual, then we experience a state of being in sublime communion. This is truly what we've been designed for, to exist in right relationship. We know that we make mistakes. We turn away from our Creator God at times. We turn away from each other. We break relationship with creation by trampling on, by being careless or reckless with creation's gifts. We're invited all the time to reconcile those relationships in the tender ways that we can touch and reach out, to think and pray, to redeem ourselves as people living the fullness of life. So those three theological imperatives I think are worth reflecting on. And I think the other dimensions in chapter 2 that are critical is that Pope Francis points out the way Jesus related with the natural world in his earthly sojourn. And he points out the loving gaze through which Jesus saw all of creation. He also points to the sacraments, and we'll come to those again in chapter 6. So now Pope Francis invites us to read chapter 3 to understand more deeply the roots of the crises we face, the social and the ecological. So in this chapter, we're invited to see that all of the things named and explored through a scientific lens in chapter 1 are actually symptoms of a much deeper problem that we need to change. This is in the context of worldviews. Pope Francis explores two key root causes, so it's easy to remember them when there's only two, hey? The first one is that we're seeing the world often from the perspective of a technological or technocratic mindset, where it's about seeing the amazing power of human ingenuity with our opposable thumb and our brain capacity and our physical capacity to reshape and exploit the earth. And creating technology that can be life-giving is a wonderful thing. Medical science breakthroughs, the worldwide internet for communication, for example. But there are many that are causing problems. And of course, it's all about the way we use that technology as well, the ethics about that. So what he's essentially saying is that if we place the technological mindset, the extractive and the fragmented way in which we might see the world then, creates more and more problems. It means that we look all the time for technology to save us, that we see that as our way of breaking through or somehow solving these complex problems we face today. Sadly, having a technological worldview at the core of our thinking and our practice means that we often objectify things and we see everything as something to be used and thrown away, not just the physical matter around us, creating waste, but also human beings as being something to be utilised for our own purposes, and when they're no longer useful, discarding them, throwing them away. So it's really important to be alert to the kind of language that gets used with this mindset of using people or taking on technology as the answer. It certainly has a part to play, and we know that technological fixes have a particular role, but it's certainly inappropriate if we hold that at the core of our understanding and thinking. The second key root cause that Pope Francis explains is a human-centered worldview, and a long word for that is anthropocentrism, putting humans right at the centre at the exclusion of the rest of creation and perhaps even a creator God. So we need to be alert to this, and I think in our church world we have actually gone down a path of progressing great work with caring for humanity. But unfortunately, it has often been at the expense of the planet because we've simply failed to hold an integrative worldview where we see the deep interconnections between us and our ecosystems that we're part of. So I think this chapter is really, really an important analysis, and it highlights the fact that the worldview that we walk around with and operate from and relate to everything with really does matter how we go about being on the planet as well as what we do on the planet. And it's inviting us to take on a holistic perspective. And that leads beautifully into chapter 4, where Pope Francis invites us to see a paradigm known as integral ecology. And integral ecology emerged a few decades ago through scientific um, research and understandings. And what Pope Francis has done by introducing it through Laudato Si has actually enhanced it even more by including the spiritual within the realm of the material world. So he invites us to see integral ecology as a way through which to live our lives and a new way in which to respond to justice. It's also become part of Catholic social teaching. So it's added to the body of Catholic social teaching that's been building up over the last 100 years or so since the first Rerum Novarum. So alongside human dignity, subsidiarity, solidarity, we now have integral ecology. And in fact, what I'm seeing more and more with Pope Francis's work since launching Laudato Si is a reframing of those values, those social justice values and pillars through the lens of an integral ecology. So we see human dignity within integral ecology, existing within that frame. And I think this is really, really important change. We're also seeing Pope Francis reorient education through that lens. And we can talk a bit more about that and the global compact on education that's coming up later this year. So in chapter 4, it's important to explore what integral ecology is about. So I'm just touching on it today, but it's something we can chat more about and explore, because really this is the invitation through which we now live our lives. And it's really foundational to say that we should no longer see the social issues in our world as separate from the ecological. Pope Francis says that we need to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of humankind together. And I think that is just so needed. Chapter 5 then invites us to come out of the depth of those roots and that response of a new paradigm to the action phase. And I think as humans, we're all pretty geared to want to do this. And it's sometimes hard for us to suspend that action reflex and go through that process of reflection and discernment. But it's so important we do, and that we keep touching into that to remind us why we're being called to act in the ways that he's advocating here. So the first line of action that he invites us to take is through dialogue. This dialogue is about saying, well, how do we respond that invites not only our own selves to keep learning about this integrated world that we live in, God's creation, and to further understand the wisdom that can help inform that by learning from each other in creation. But it also helps us have the dialogue we need to about how might we respond to these problems that we're facing, so that we're not creating more problems, but we're actually addressing the root causes at the same time. So there's some very beautiful messages in how to approach living an integral ecology. And he invites us to see that the common good is a Catholic social teaching value that's going to help us enormously. He says that this will help us to escape the spiral of self-destruction which currently engulfs us. So we're tempted often through our own human condition, our egos and other needs of survival, to selfishly respond in ways that will benefit ourselves. But Pope Francis is inviting us to see that if we aim and we hold the common good as one of our core values for responding, then we can actually help not only our neighbours and the planet, but ourselves to be much better in terms of who we are and how we're called to be to leave a better future. He also points out here that the church is not presuming to settle scientific questions or to replace the politics that exist in the structures of the world, but rather for us to model dialogue by showing that it requires honesty and open debate. And therefore, this can help set the particular interests and ideologies and agendas of those who are not holding the common good to illuminate that, so that we may be able to go forth together in a more constructive way. And finally, to conclude this summary, chapter 6 invites everybody to see that whilst dialogue is the first action that we need to take with each other and with our institutions, we also need to continue the path of our own ecological education and our own spiritual development, and to actually enable that for everyone else, because we're really behind and we've got some significant gaps. So this chapter is really exciting for me as somebody who's been an ecological educator for some decades. I'm very passionate about being able to bring this to the fore at the moment, and I'm doing some PhD studies in this space, as well as doing some work with the Vatican Dicastery on the COVID-19 task force. So the educational space is one for us to be alert to. Every time we're communicating with one another, we have the opportunity to highlight the wisdom of Laudato Si and the kinds of responses that it's calling for. And I think that is a simple act of education, just the way we communicate. But to actually bring in some very tailored, structured programs, I think, is more and more important, and hence the call for a reorientation to Catholic education globally through the Global Education Compact. Pope Francis in chapter 6 invites us to aim for a new lifestyle, to bring healthy pressure to bear on all those who wield political, economic and social power. So this call to participate is not to be passive and not to just do this individually, but to see that the call for ecological conversion is one for a communal conversion at this time. He says we can't just be content with a personal conversion journey. In fact, it's much more urgent than that. It requires collective and communal conversion and institutional change. So we're all called to participate in that from wherever we are. So perhaps now, if we come back to that reflection question, how can we bring Laudato Si to life at our home, in our parish, in our school, in our community, in our archdiocese perhaps, if you work at that level, or have ability to influence that. At a national level, if there's those that you know who are involved with decisions made nationally, and even globally, those who you can reach out to and connect with. Please put any questions that you might be having into the Q&A as well. And Robbie will be looking at those, and that might be an opportunity in a minute just to have some dialogue about some of those questions. So let's move to dialogue now, and I'll take it back from the shared screen. Next time we get together, we're going to invite you into some breakout rooms to have dialogue with one another as well. But for tonight, we might just take some Q&A and see where we're up to with how this is resonating with you. Robbie, any questions that have come up so far?
Yes, we have a question from Marania about integral ecology. And Marania has said, I understand that it catches up social justice issues with environmental, but still I struggle to position this concept. Is it a theological frame, or sociological, or biological, or spiritual, or all of these? Is it a uniquely Catholic term or concept? Wondering how to use this term integral ecology in secular situations.
Great. A very good question. Yes, it is all of those spheres that you've talked about. So it's social, it's ecological, it's cultural, it's spiritual, it's theological, it's all of the spheres together. And I was just looking then while you asked that question for a visual, because I have got a visual that attempts to capture those spheres together, and it doesn't seem to be at my fingertips. I think it's because I thought it might be good to show that on Thursday night, so I will have that at my fingertips then. I think when you talk about how to bring that into dialogue with people, one of the things I've found really helpful is in cultivating an integral worldview in myself. It means that when I'm listening and engaging in dialogue with people, I'm bringing that frame of reference to the conversation. And so wherever people are at and whatever's going on, I can reflect from that space and respond to the particular questions or the specifics that are being asked with that in mind. And I think that means then that there are different perspectives being shared, and that's the key. That is what really matters in sharing a variety of wisdom about any issue we're looking at. I don't think we often get the chance to sort of in a, I guess, a explanatory way to unpack it every time. But I think if we're operating from an integral perspective, then what we write, what we say, how we connect with people, that has an influence in what goes on. But when there is an opportunity to share it, then I think it's important that we can articulate that it's about bringing all of the various disciplines and wisdom together as best as we can. You know, no one of us is ever going to have that fully and down pat. You know, I think our lives and the chance to live a life on this planet is about exploring that and growing that and understanding the depths and the breadths of it. But I do think that that's what we're invited to integrate all the time with new knowledge that we come across, with new understandings and new feelings we have. To integrate that into our lives is the key. And when we're invited to share something of that, to try and articulate that as best we can, and to say that that's the call of integral ecology. I hope that helps in some way, but I do have a visual I'd like to share with you on Thursday about that as well.
Jacqui, let's move to a second question.
Sure, Robbie.
This is from Paul. Why is there such little interest by Australia's Catholic clergy in Laudato Si? 5 years ago, there was modest clerical interest, but that has dissipated despite the continuing relevance of Laudato Si.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, you're right. There was interest when it first came out. I had the opportunity to present to the Bishops' Conference with Father Sean McDonough when he came out. And I was also invited to do formation work with several dioceses. So Wagga Wagga, Armidale, Sale, and Rockhampton when we had Brian Heenan there. So there's been formation with some that's been structured and considered and offered. And I'm sure there are others I don't know about that have been happening. But you're right that it has fallen off the burner in some way or gone to the back burner, if I can use that colloquial expression. I think we can all recognise that there was an unfortunate timing with Laudato Si coming out, the call for a royal commission in Australia into child sex abuse, and the huge amount of work, attention, and stress that brought about for the leaders of our church. So some of the bishops I spoke to when I met with them in their own individual diocese and archdiocese expressed to me that they had no issue with Laudato Si, but they had so much they needed to do in responding to the Royal Commission at that time. And of course, when you're looking at competing demands like that, it is very it's disappointing for somebody like me, obviously, and for perhaps people like you to hear that, but that's been the reality. Now we're coming to a point where it's about the enacting some significant change and reform and action as a result of that Royal Commission. And we're still waiting for a lot of that to keep coming and be a reality in our church and our world. We've also had the plenary council process begin, and we're into that. So there's always a lot going on, and there's more than that. They're just some things, but there's significant national processes that have been happening and in some ways competing with Laudato Si. I think now with the 5th anniversary, with the continuing work of Pope Francis with this, with the dicastery on integral human development that was established, the great work that's happened under Cardinal Peter Turkson with the Ecology Office headed up by Father Jostrom Carethodum, with initiatives that have begun at the grassroots or bottom-up level that have been happening. Some dioceses have been much more organised as a whole diocese, like Brisbane Archdiocese, and others, and in the Kimberley, but others have had just segments or sectors of their Catholic community get engaged, whether it's the school's office and the whole school space or individual schools. We still have a lot of work to do. And I think that's why the importance of marking Laudato Si Week each year, of participating in the season of creation every September, 1st of September through to the 5th of October or the 4th of October with St. Francis of Assisi's feast day, and all of those moments where we can illuminate creation, lift it up in our liturgy, prayer and practice, and call for a more formalised plan of action to structurally integrate ecology in is the key. There's a document I'll also share on Thursday night that's just been released from that dicastery on integral human development around Laudato Si, calling for everyone to participate in a plan. And actually I've sent it to Roger so he can email it to you. And there's a whole variety of things suggested in this plan that's an overarching global plan for implementation that can help inspire action on the ground. So I think rather than waiting for all of that structural planning to be done individually in your archdiocese or organisation, you can look to that kind of document to help see how to live into it as well. Roger, you were going to ask a question.
I was just going to also acknowledge some of our spiritual leaders are here with us tonight. And it's great to have the parish priests from some of those drought-affected and fire-affected parishes, our own parish priest, to acknowledge their presence, but accepting that we can do far more to stimulate the messages from Corrida Amazonia at the Synod and Laudato Si and so on. But I will circulate that other document that you mentioned. Thanks, Jacqui.
No problem. Thank you. And I think you're right to suggest that the work of ecological conversion is something that needs to be constantly, highlighted, reminded, the opportunities of weaving that through whatever programs are going on, because it's relevant no matter who you look at or which direction you turn in. And it's really all about how we see it, so that we're not seeing it as piecemeal parts, or a few greening initiatives. It's much deeper and broader than that, isn't it? Robbie, did you have another question from participants?
Yes, we have 3 more questions.
Super.
This one is from Brendan Gibson, and Brendan asks, do you find our recent experience of bushfires a way of connecting the Laudato Si message with the realities of life in Australia in new ways?
Yes, I do. Unfortunately, when crises happen, like our huge burning over many, many months, or even the pandemic we're facing at the moment, it's the opportunity that's created through that crisis event that enables reflection, thinking, practice and action to emerge that's really needed. So you would have noticed that Pope Francis made a key statement about the bushfires in Australia. And recently on Earth Day, his catechesis that day asked who is now talking about the victims of the Australian bushfires and the after effects, as well as other issues like the fires in the Amazon that were burning last year, the melting of ice caps, the polar ice caps. So I think it's a sad case of reality that it takes a crisis for sometimes the change to happen. And that's by virtue of the fact that it happens for a group of people all at once. So in Australia, sometimes we need a wake-up call, but globally we've needed a wake-up call, which is how I think the COVID pandemic can be viewed as not just a human health crisis, but actually part of the bigger ecological crises we face.
And that picks up on the next question from Fenella Temmerman. Fenella asks, do you see the present COVID-19 pandemic as contributing to a new awareness and discussion of the interconnectedness of everything? And if so, how might we capitalise on that?
Thanks for that question. Yes, it's a very important one because I do see it as a signal for the dawn of a new era for us. And whilst it is deeply in my thoughts and heart, the suffering of so many people and so many families affected by the loss of loved ones, it is a moment where collectively we're invited to change the course of history, to choose a new path and new models for economic growth and development that actually are good in terms of the planet and people. We have a huge amount of funds being put into our system right now, more than has in fact ever happened in human history. $20 trillion being flowing into our economies. So the scale of that injection's not been seen before. It's an unprecedented opportunity. And from this, we have the opportunity to really begin again, to set a new course and to learn from the mistakes we've made in the past, to reflect very deeply on the kind of people that we are and the creator that we're responsible or accountable to, and act with greater solidarity, solidarity for the future, with responsibility to those who are present today in the world, and with a much longer term view, so we can build back better. And I think that this is being compressed by the pandemic. We knew that with the climate crisis, which is, changing things over a much longer period of time, that we needed to change course. And we've been tracking in some direction towards that through the Paris Agreement, but there's a lot more concrete action and solidarity that needs to be shown. But the pandemic is actually bringing it into this moment. We really only have the next 18 months of this $20 trillion flowing through our sister human systems to prioritise the things that matter most and to make the difference with that. So I think our time of acting is quickly upon us. And I'm really pleased that through our church structures at the Vatican, with Pope Francis initiating the COVID-19 task force and bringing together the different streams of communication, fundraising, emergency response, and analysis and thinking, as well as health responses, we can actually chart a path and hold up for the world a way in which we want to see this done. It means there's a lot of negotiating to do through our Secretary of State and through all our church leaders on the ground with their local leaders. But I do think that this vision of what's emerging through that task force is going to be important to pay attention to and to take it up as all of us need to participate in this change on the ground. Robbie, how many more questions do you have?
Well, there's a couple, but why don't I'll just go back to one of them. Did the field of ecology not include all these things already? Again, from Morania.
So ecology, of course, when we take it in its broader sense of the universe, you know, the cosmic reality that God's creation is constantly emerging in, then of course everything is included within that frame of reference. Ecology is often referred to as the study of relationship between living things, and so depending upon one's beliefs and worldview, it may not always include that whole holistic understanding of the spiritual as well as the matter and everything else in that. So thank you. That's a great question, and it's important to see that, you know, interconnectedness of everything that's visible and invisible as being the great ecology of God's creation. What a good note to finish on, hey?
That's wonderful.
So should we thank everyone for their participation? I certainly would like to say thank you for joining us this evening and move to our closing prayer.
I might just ask Father Pale if I could lead us in our closing prayer. Father Pale is in the parish of Pambula, which we know has been doing it tough with the fires.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation tonight. Well done, Jacqui, and to all those who are participating. Let's bring ourselves into the presence of our blessed Lord and calling on his blessings to give us his blessing of knowledge and the gift of understanding and the relationship of one another and God and of course the creation. O powerful God,
you are present,
in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of his earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. And we ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks so much, Father Paolo. That's beautiful. So thanks, everyone. It's been a good start, and Roger, thanks so much for organising this, getting us all together. If you can join us on Thursday evening, that would be wonderful, and we'll break into chat rooms. We'll also have the opportunity for more Q&A and to share some of the plans that are emerging, but most importantly to think about how might this come to life in your lives in the context of your home, your parish, more fully. How else can we respond and live into this together? Thanks, everyone.